I vanished like missing 411. It was a crisp autumn morning in the small mountain town of Timber Ridge, nestled deep within the dense forests of northern Idaho. The air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter, and the sun struggled to break through the thick canopy above. At 7:15 a.m., Megan Carter prepared for another day of hiking along her favorite trail, one she had walked countless times before. The trail wound through towering pines and rocky outcrops, offering breathtaking views of the valley below. But this time, something would be different, something no one could have predicted. Megan loved the solitude of the forest, the way it wrapped around her like an old friend. She carried only the essential water bottle, some snacks, and her phone tucked safely into her pocket. As she set off down the trail, boots crunching against the frost-covered leaves, she felt invigorated by the fresh air and the promise of adventure ahead. Yet, as the hours passed and the path grew increasingly isolated, a strange unease began to settle over her. By mid-morning, Megan reached a clearing. She knew well a wide expanse of grass surrounded by ancient trees whose branches stretched skyward like skeletal fingers. It was here that she paused to take in the scenery, snapping a few photos with her phone. That's when she noticed a faint humming sound, barely audible over the rustling leaves and chirping birds. Curious, she turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint its source. The hum grew louder, more insistent, until it filled her ears completely, drowning out all other sounds. Suddenly, the world around her seemed to shift. The once familiar landscape blurred at the edges, colors fading into shades of gray as if viewed through frosted glass. Megan stumbled backward, disoriented, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "What's happening?" she whispered, clutching her phone tightly as if it might anchor her to reality. But then, without warning, the device slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the ground and shattering on impact. Panic surged through her as she realized she was completely cut off from help. The clearing now appeared eerily still, the previously lively atmosphere replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against her eardrums. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of her vision, darting between trees and vanishing just as quickly. Megan called out, her voice trembling slightly, but there was no response, only the unsettling sensation of being watched. She tried to retrace her steps, retracing the path she had taken earlier, but each turn led her deeper into unfamiliar territory. The trail markers she relied on were gone, replaced by tangled underbrush and fallen logs that blocked her way. Hours, perhaps minutes. Time seemed distorted, hair passed as Megan wandered aimlessly through the forest, her mind racing with questions. Where had she gone wrong? Why did the trail seem to twist and turn unpredictably, leading her further astray with every step? And, most importantly, why did she feel so certain that she wasn't alone? As daylight began to fade, casting long shadows across the ground, Megan spotted something unusual in the distance, a cluster of strange symbols etched into the bark of a nearby tree. They looked almost deliberate, as though carved by human hands, yet their meaning eluded her. Beneath them lay scattered remnants of what appeared to be clothing, a torn piece of fabric, a frayed shoelace, and a single photograph half buried in the dirt. Picking it up carefully, Megan examined the image closely. It depicted a group of people standing together, smiling happily, though none of their faces were familiar to her. What struck her most, however, was the date scrawled on the back years prior to her visit. A cold dread settled in her stomach as realization dawned upon her. These weren't ordinary artifacts, they belonged to others who had vanished without explanation, part of the mysterious phenomenon known locally as Missing 411. Stories abounded of hikers disappearing under similar circumstances, lured deep into the woods by unexplained forces, or simply vanishing into thin air. Some theorized alien abduction, while others pointed to supernatural entities guarding the forest jealously against intruders. Whatever the truth, Megan knew she was caught in the same snare. Night fell swiftly, plunging the forest into darkness save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. Megan huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of branches and leaves, her body shaking uncontrollably from fear and exhaustion. Around her, strange noises echoed through the night, low growls, haunting whispers, and occasional bursts of laughter that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. Sleep proved impossible, her mind replaying every detail of the day's events in endless loops. Days, or perhaps weeks, time remained elusive, hair blurred together as Megan continued her desperate search for escape. Food and water ran low, forcing her to rely on whatever sustenance the forest provided. Her clothes grew tattered, her skin scratched and bruised from navigating treacherous terrain. Yet, despite her deteriorating condition, a part of her remained oddly calm, as if accepting her fate willingly. Was this how others had felt before disappearing forever? Trapped in an endless loop, unable to break free from the forest's grip? One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Megan stumbled upon a peculiar sight: a cabin hidden deep within the woods, its windows dark but its door slightly ajar. Hope surged within her as she approached cautiously, calling out in case anyone might be inside. When no answer came, she pushed the door open gently, stepping inside to find the interior eerily intact. Furniture stood arranged neatly, books rested on shelves, and personal belongings littered surfaces as if their owners had left suddenly and never returned. On the wall hung a calendar, its pages flipped to a date far in the past, marking the disappearance of someone else who had ventured too far. Among the items scattered about, Megan discovered journals belonging to previous occupants, detailing their experiences in the forest. Each entry spoke of growing confusion, disorientation, and paranoia, culminating in final messages written in frantic handwriting before going silent altogether. Reading these accounts, Megan understood fully the gravity of her situation. She was not merely lost, she was trapped in a realm beyond normal understanding, a place where logic failed and mysteries thrived. Determined to uncover answers, Megan explored the cabin thoroughly, eventually finding a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside rested an old map marked with cryptic symbols and annotations referencing locations throughout the forest. Following its directions, she ventured further than ever before, encountering sights both beautiful and terrifying: waterfalls cascading endlessly upward, meadows bathed in perpetual twilight, and creatures unlike anything she had ever seen before. Along the way, she documented everything, leaving notes and markings for those who might come after her. But with each discovery came new dangers. Shadows followed her movements, whispering promises of release if she surrendered entirely. Visions plagued her dreams, showing glimpses of others who had vanished before her, faces pale and hollow, eyes devoid of life. Still, Megan pressed on, driven by a stubborn refusal to give in to despair. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Megan found herself standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley below. The scene was breathtakingly familiar, the exact view she had admired during her initial hike. Yet, something felt fundamentally different about it now. Before her loomed a figure cloaked in shadow, its presence commanding yet serene. Without speaking a word, it extended a hand toward her, inviting her to join it. For a moment, Megan hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Then, taking a deep breath, she reached out and grasped the offered hand. Immediately, the world around her dissolved into light, consuming everything in its path. When clarity returned, Megan found herself back in the clearing where her journey had begun. Her phone lay intact beside her, untouched by the ordeal, as if none of it had ever happened. Confused and shaken, Megan reported her experience to local authorities, describing in detail everything she had endured. Investigators searched the area thoroughly, but found no evidence of anything unusual, no missing persons reports matching her descriptions, no signs of disturbances in the forest. To all outward appearances, Megan's account was nothing more than a vivid hallucination brought on by fatigue and isolation. Yet, Deep down, Megan knew better. Somewhere, deep within the woods of Timber Ridge, others still waited trapped in a liminal space between worlds, hoping against hope for rescue. And though she had escaped, Megan couldn't help but wonder if she truly belonged among them. Bigfoot whispered my name at night. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Pine Hollow, where the air carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The clock struck 10:30 p.m. as the Carter family, Michael, his wife Emily, and their two children, Jake aged 12 and Lily, who was 8, settled into their modest cabin on the edge of a dense forest. The cabin itself was nestled deep within the towering trees, its wooden walls creaking softly with every gust of wind that swept through the valley. For years, the Carters had enjoyed peaceful nights here, lulled to sleep by the rustling leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. But this night would be different. The family gathered around the fireplace, its warmth casting flickering shadows across the room. Michael read aloud from an old book about local legends, pausing occasionally to explain the tales to his curious children. Among the stories were whispers of Bigfoot, a mysterious creature said to roam these very woods, watching silently from the shadows. While Jake listened intently, his imagination sparked by the vivid descriptions, Lily curled up beside her mother, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and fear. As the fire dwindled and embers glowed faintly, the family retired to bed, each retreating to their respective rooms. Outside, the forest grew eerily still, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before Lily woke with a start, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She lay perfectly still, straining her ears to listen. At first, she thought it might have been a dream-faint rustling outside her window, the soft tapping against the glass, but then came the voice. "Lily," it whispered, low and gravelly, yet unmistakably clear. Her breath caught in her throat as sheer terror gripped her body. The voice wasn't human. It carried an otherworldly quality, reverberating through the room as if spoken directly into her mind. Clutching her blanket tightly, she squeezed her eyes shut, willing the sound to stop, but it didn't. Instead, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, calling her name over and over again until it filled every corner of the room. Outside, the moon peeked through the clouds, casting silvery light across the forest floor. Shadows danced eerily among the trees, their movements unnatural and deliberate. Lily dared not cry out for fear of drawing whatever presence lingered closer. Her hands trembled as she reached for her flashlight, switching it on cautiously. The beam of light illuminated nothing but empty space near her window, though she could feel its gaze boring into her from somewhere beyond. Unable to bear the suspense any longer, Lily slipped quietly out of bed, padding softly toward the door. She hesitated briefly before opening it, just enough to peek into the hallway. To her relief, the rest of the house appeared calm, the rhythmic breathing of her family members audible through the thin walls. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her every move. Back in her room, the whispers resumed, growing bolder now. They weren't merely calling her name anymore, they were speaking directly to her, urging her to come outside. "You won't be afraid," the voice promised, its tone soothing yet undeniably menacing. "Come see me, I've waited so long." Each word sent shivers down Lily's spine, yet part of her felt inexplicably drawn to obey. Summoning whatever courage she possessed, Lily tiptoed to the front door, her fingers trembling as she turned the handle. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped onto the porch, her bare feet brushing against the wooden planks. The forest loomed ahead, its darkness impenetrable even under the pale glow of the moon. Yet, amidst the shadows, she spotted Movement's massive figure standing motionless at the edge of the tree line. Its form was hulking, its shoulders broad and covered in thick fur that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Its head tilted slightly, studying her with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. For a moment, neither moved, locked in a silent exchange that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without warning, the creature took a step forward, its massive feet crunching against the fallen leaves. Lily gasped, stepping back instinctively. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. The creature paused, tilting its head once more as if considering her words. Then, slowly, it raised one hand, pointing toward the forest. "Follow me," it whispered, its voice resonating through the night air. Paralyzed with fear but unable to look away, Lily stood frozen as the creature turned and disappeared into the depths of the woods. Behind her, the door creaked open as Michael emerged, alerted by her cries. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. But when he looked where she pointed, there was nothing, only the endless expanse of trees swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the family huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. Emily held Lily tightly, her own fear masked by maternal instinct. Michael grabbed a flashlight and ventured cautiously into the woods, searching for any sign of the mysterious figure. But the forest remained silent, its secrets hidden beneath layers of shadow and mist. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued the cabin. Objects moved on their own accord, doors creaked open and shut without explanation, and whispers echoed through the halls late at night. Lily claimed to hear her name called repeatedly, though no one else could confirm the sounds. Despite their skepticism, the family began to believe they were being watch-stalked even by something far greater than themselves. Desperate for answers, they consulted local historians and Native American elders, learning about the legend of Bigfoot and its connection to the land. Some believed the creature acted as a guardian of the forest, protecting it from those who sought to harm it. Others spoke of encounters with beings who communicated telepathically, offering guidance or warnings depending on intent. Regardless, the parallels between these accounts and their own experiences were undeniable. Weeks turned into months, and the haunting continued. Sleep eluded the Carters as they listened helplessly to the whispers that filled their home. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to leave Pine Hollow behind, relocating to a city far removed from the forest and its mysteries. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They rebuilt routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of urban surroundings. Yet every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Lily swore she heard it again, that same gravelly voice whispering her name softly in the dark. Years later, the Carters rarely spoke of their ordeal. Though grateful for their escape, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant hadn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Pine Hollow, Bigfoot still waited, watching, listening, ready to call another name into the night. Hookman left his claw behind. It was a chilly autumn evening in the small town of Willow Creek, where the air carried the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. The clock struck 9:45 p.m. as Emily Carter sat nervously in her car, parked near the edge of a darkened forest at the end of Maple Lane. Beside her sat her boyfriend, Mark Thompson, his arm resting casually on the back of the seat as he tried to reassure her with light conversation. The forest loomed ominously ahead, its towering trees casting long shadows across the road, even under the pale glow of the moon. Neither spoke of the reason they were there, the infamous legend of the Hookman. The story had been whispered among their friends for years, passed down like an urban myth meant to scare teenagers into behaving themselves. According to local lore, the Hookman was a disfigured killer who roamed the woods at night, searching for unsuspecting victims. His weapon of choice? A jagged, claw-like hook that replaced one of his handsaw, gruesome reminder of his violent past. Some claimed he had died decades ago, while others swore he still stalked the area, drawn by the fear of those who dared visit his domain after dark. Tonight, Emily and Mark found themselves testing the truth behind those tales. As they sat in silence, the forest grew eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling stillness. A sudden gust of wind rattled the car windows, making Emily jump. "Do you think it's true?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempts to sound brave. Mark chuckled nervously, though his grip on the steering wheel tightened involuntarily. "Of course not," he replied, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's just a story." But then came the sound of faint scratching noise against the roof of the car, followed by a soft thud as if something heavy had landed nearby. Both froze, their hearts pounding wildly in unison. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her eyes darting toward the rearview mirror. Outside, the forest remained silent, its shadows unmoving, yet somehow more menacing now. Mark turned the key in the ignition, preparing to drive away, but the car engine refused to start. Panic surged through them as they realized they were trapped. From somewhere beyond the tree line emerged a figure tall, gaunt, and cloaked in darkness. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its presence radiated an undeniable menace. In one hand, it held what appeared unmistakably to be a hooked blade, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Emily screamed, throwing herself against the passenger door as the figure approached slowly, deliberately. Each step echoed through the night, amplifying their terror until it felt almost unbearable. "Stay calm," Mark urged, though his own voice betrayed his fear. He fumbled with the keys, praying the engine would cooperate, but nothing happened. The figure reached the car window now, its claw scraping lightly against the glass. Inside, Emily sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her purse tightly as if it might protect her from whatever horror awaited outside. Mark grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, shining it directly at the figure in hopes of driving it back. But instead of retreating, the creature tilted its head slightly, studying them with unnatural curiosity. Then, without warning, it vanished, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Emily and Mark sat frozen for several moments, unsure whether to believe their eyes. Finally, the car engine roared to life and they sped away from the forest as fast as possible. Behind them, the hookman's laughter echoed through the night, chilling them to the bone. Back at Emily's house, they collapsed onto the couch, breathing heavily as adrenaline coursed through their veins. Their relief was short-lived, however, when Emily noticed something peculiar inside her Percy single, rust-stained claw resting among her belongings. Her breath caught in her throat as sheer terror gripped her body once again. "He left it behind," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. Mark examined the object closely, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched it. It was unmistakably Riala, grotesque relic of the hookman's existence. Yet, how had it gotten there? Neither could remember opening their bags during the encounter, nor did they recall seeing him drop anything before disappearing. The implications were terrifying. They weren't merely being watched, they were being toyed with. Over the following days, strange occurrences plagued Emily and Mark's lives. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of their vision, whispers filled the air even when no one else was present, and occasionally, they heard the faint scratching sound that reminded them all too vividly of that fateful night. Sleep became impossible, their minds replaying every detail of the encounter in endless loops. Desperate for answers, they consulted local historians and paranormal investigators, learning about similar cases involving the Hookman. Some claimed he acted out of vengeance, seeking retribution against those who mocked his deformity. Others believed he was bound to the forest, unable to leave its confines unless invited willingly by prey. Eventually, the strain became too much to bear. With nowhere else to turn, Emily and Mark sought refuge in separate cities, hoping distance might sever their connection to the entity haunting them. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They rebuilt routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of new surroundings. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Emily swore she heard it again, that same scratching sound creeping closer, accompanied by faint giggles that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. Years later, neither speaks of their ordeal openly. Though grateful for their escape, they can't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant hasn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Willow Creek, the Hook Man still waits watching, waiting, ready to claim his next victim. Cropsy breathed outside our window. It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Willow Hollow, where the air carried an unsettling chill that seemed to seep into every corner. The clock read 11:30 p.m. as the Carter family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their two children, Jake, aged 12, and Lily, who was 8, settled into their modest home on Pine Lane. The house stood nestled among towering trees, its wooden walls creaking softly with every gust of wind that swept through the valley. For years, the Carters had enjoyed peaceful nights here, lulled to sleep by the rustling leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. But this night would be different. The family gathered in the living room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls. Mark read aloud from an old book about local legends, pausing occasionally to explain the tales to his curious children. Among the stories were whispers of a mysterious figure said to haunt these very woods, lurking in the shadows and preying on unsuspecting victims. While Jake listened intently, his imagination sparked by the vivid descriptions, Lily curled up beside her mother, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and fear. As the fire dwindled and embers glowed faintly, the family retired to bed, each retreating to their respective rooms. Outside, the forest grew eerily still, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before Lily woke with a start, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She lay perfectly still, straining her ears to listen. At first, she thought it might have been a dream, faint rustling outside her window, the soft tapping against the glass, but then came the breath. "Shh," it whispered, low and raspy, right outside her bedroom window. Her breath caught in her throat as sheer terror gripped her body. The sound wasn't human. It carried an otherworldly quality, reverberating through the room as if spoken directly into her mind. Clutching her blanket tightly, she squeezed her eyes shut, willing the sound to stop. But it didn't. Instead, the breathing grew louder, more insistent, pressing against the glass as if trying to force its way inside. Outside, the moon peeked through the clouds, casting silvery light across the forest floor. Shadows danced eerily among the trees, their movements unnatural and deliberate. Lily dared not cry out for fear of drawing whatever presence lingered closer. Her hands trembled as she reached for her flashlight, switching it on cautiously. The beam of light illuminated nothing but empty space near her window, though she could feel its gaze boring into her from somewhere beyond. Unable to bear the suspense any longer, Lily slipped quietly out of bed, padding softly toward the door. She hesitated briefly before opening it just enough to peek into the hallway. To her relief, the rest of the house appeared calm, the rhythmic breathing of her family members audible through the thin walls. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her every move. Back in her room, the breathing resumed, growing bolder now. It wasn't merely outside anymore. It seemed to echo through the walls, filling every corner of the room. "Come out and play," it whispered, its tones soothing yet undeniably menacing. Each word sent shivers down Lily's spine, yet part of her felt inexplicably drawn to obey. Summoning whatever courage she possessed, Lily tiptoed to the front door, her fingers trembling as she turned the handle. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped onto the porch, her bare feet brushing against the wooden planks. The forest loomed ahead, its darkness impenetrable even under the pale glow of the moon. Yet, amidst the shadows, she spotted Movemanta hunched figure standing motionless at the edge of the tree line. Its form was gaunt, its shoulders slumped and covered in tattered clothing that flapped gently in the breeze. Its head tilted slightly, studying her with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. For a moment, neither moved, locked in a silent exchange that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, without warning, the creature took a step forward, its massive feet crunching against the fallen leaves. Lily gasped, stepping back instinctively. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. The creature paused, tilting its head once more as if considering her words. Then, slowly, it raised one hand, pointing toward the forest. "Follow me," it whispered, its voice resonating through the night air. Paralyzed with fear, but unable to look away, Lily stood frozen as the creature turned and disappeared into the depths of the woods. Behind her, the door creaked open as Mark emerged, alerted by her cries. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. But when he looked where she pointed, there was nothing, only the endless expanse of trees swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the family huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. Emily held Lily tightly, her own fear masked by maternal instinct. Mark grabbed a flashlight and ventured cautiously into the woods, searching for any sign of the mysterious figure. But the forest remained silent, its secrets hidden beneath layers of shadow and mist. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued the cabin. Objects moved on their own accord, doors creaked open and shut without explanation, and whispers echoed through the halls late at night. Lily claimed to hear her name called repeatedly, though no one else could confirm the sounds. Despite their skepticism, the family began to believe they were being watch-stalked, even by something far greater than themselves. Desperate for answers, they consulted local historians and Native American elders, learning about the legend of Cropsey and its connection to the land. Some believed the creature acted as a guardian of the forest, protecting it from those who sought to harm it. Others spoke of encounters with beings who communicated telepathically, offering guidance or warnings depending on intent. Regardless, the parallels between these accounts and their own experiences were undeniable. Weeks turned into months, and the haunting continued. Sleep eluded the Carters as they listened helplessly to the whispers that filled their home. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to leave Willow Hollow behind, relocating to a city far removed from the forest and its mysteries. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They rebuilt routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of urban surroundings. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Lily swore she heard it again, that same raspy whisper calling her name softly in the dark. Years later, the Carters rarely spoke of their ordeal. Though grateful for their escape, they couldn't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Willow Hollow, Cropsey still waited, watching, listening, ready to call another name into the night.
Next story. The Bridge That Warps Time. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves as I stood at the edge of the forest, staring down the narrow dirt road that led to it. It wasn't marked on any map, not even Google Maps, which had become my lifeline during this impromptu road trip through the backwoods of northern Maine. My GPS had been acting up for miles now, its once reliable voice cutting out mid-sentence, replaced by static or silence altogether. I hesitated before stepping forward, glancing over my shoulder at the car parked haphazardly on the side of the road. Its headlights cast long shadows across the underbrush, illuminating nothing but an endless sea of trees. This place felt wrong, like the kind of spot where stories began and ended. But curiosity, that insidious little devil, pushed me forward. And then I saw it. The bridge loomed ahead, skeletal and ancient, spanning a ravine so deep I couldn't see the bottom. It looked like something out of a postcard from another century. Weathered wooden planks creaking beneath moss-covered beams, iron supports rusted nearly beyond recognition. Yet despite its decrepit appearance, there was something unsettling about it, something that made my skin prickle and my breath catch in my throat. It didn't belong here. As I approached, the sound of rushing water below grew louder, though I still couldn't make out the source. Each step closer sent shivers racing up my spine. There were no signs warning travelers away, no caution tape blocking access, just the bridge itself waiting silently for whoever dared cross it. A local legend, perhaps? I thought briefly of asking someone in town earlier, but they all seemed too eager to change the subject whenever I mentioned the area. One man, his face lined with years of hard living, simply stared at me for what felt like an eternity before muttering something about things best left alone. His words echoed in my mind now, chilling in their ambiguity. Still, I kept walking. My phone buzzed in my Poketa text notification. Pulling it out, I frowned when I saw the message displayed on the screen. Don't go. No sender name, no number. Just those two stark words glowing ominously against the dark background. Before I could process it further, the phone glitched violently, the screen flickering between random photos, videos, and apps until finally going black. Dead. Completely dead. Forcing myself to breathe, I slipped the useless device back into my pocket and took one last look around. The forest seemed quieter now, almost suffocating in its stillness. No birds chirping, no wind rustling the leaves. Just the steady hum of unease building in my chest. Then I stepped onto the bridge. At first, everything seemed normal. The planks groaned beneath my weight, tiny splinters digging into the soles of my shoes. The roar of the river or whatever lay below was deafening, yet strangely distant, as if muffled by some invisible barrier. I glanced down, expecting to see cracks in the wood or exposed nails, but instead found myself staring at reflections. Not mine, though. They moved independently of me, distorted figures caught mid-motion, some reaching out, others screaming silently, their mouths stretched wide in silent agony. Their eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, unwavering, and then they vanished, swallowed by the darkness below. Time began to shift. I noticed it first when I checked my watch, another futile attempt to regain control. The second hand twitched erratically, stopping and starting in unpredictable bursts. Seconds dragged into minutes. Minutes collapsed into seconds. My heartbeat quickened, matching the erratic rhythm of the clock. Was I imagining it, or was something else at play? Footsteps echoed behind me. Spinning around, I searched the bridge for whoever or whatever was following me, but I was alone. The only sound came from the river far below, its ceaseless flow masking anything else that might be lurking in the shadows. Still, the footsteps persisted, growing louder with each passing moment. They weren't coming from behind anymore, they were ahead. Ahead of me. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized the impossible. The steps were echoing before I moved. By the time I reached the midpoint of the bridge, reality had fractured completely. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the landscape, but the temperature plummeted, frost forming instantly on the wooden planks beneath my feet. Night fell abruptly, stars winking into existence above me as though triggered by some cosmic switch. Then dawn broke again, painting the world in hues of pink and orange. All within the span of a single breath. Voices joined the cacophony now, whispers carried on the wind like fragments of forgotten memories. Some called my name, familiar yet distorted, while others spoke in languages I couldn't understand. Among them, one voice stood out, a child's laughter, pure and innocent, followed by a sharp cry of pain. I froze, searching desperately for its source, but the sound faded before I could pinpoint it. And then, I heard it again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. When I turned, I wasn't alone anymore. A figure stood at the other end of the bridge, silhouetted against the unnatural glow of the horizon. Tall and gaunt, its features obscured by shadow, it watched me with an intensity that paralyzed me where I stood. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the distance between us stretching infinitely wider than the physical space allowed. Then it raised a hand, pointing directly at me. Time unraveled. Seconds stretched into hours, days, centuries. My body aged rapidly, wrinkles carving deep lines into my face as gray hairs sprouted overnight. Yet somehow I remained conscious throughout the transformation, trapped in a loop of perpetual decay and renewal. Memories blurred together, overlapping and fracturing until I couldn't tell what was real and what was illusion. Around me, the bridge twisted and contorted, becoming less a structure and more a liminal space, a threshold between worlds. Figures appeared and disappeared without warning, their faces frozen in expressions of terror or grief. Shadows slithered along the ground, writhing like living creatures, while the voices grew louder, drowning out all rational thought. Somewhere amidst the chaos, I stumbled upon a horrifying truth. Time wasn't just warped, it was alive, conscious, sentient, and it wanted me. Or rather, it wanted to keep me. As the realization dawned, the bridge began to collapse around me, wooden planks splintering and falling into the abyss below. Desperation fueled my movements, forcing me to run despite the overwhelming fatigue threatening to consume me. Every step felt heavier than the last, gravity pulling me downward with increasing ferocity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst free of the bridge and collapsed onto solid ground. Gasping for air, I rolled onto my back, staring up at the sky. It was night again, the stars twinkling innocently overhead. Everything seemed normal, too normal. That's when I noticed him. Standing a few feet away, watching me with an expression somewhere between pity and amusement, was a younger version of myself. He looked exactly as I had mere moments ago, before the bridge drained decades from my life. Our eyes met, and for a brief instant I saw understanding flash across his face. He knew. Knew what? Before I could ask, he smiled faintly and shook his head, mouthing a single word. Run. I don't remember much after that, only fragments, flashes of light, echoes of screams, the sensation of being pulled in opposite directions. When I finally came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, tubes snaking from my arms, machines beeping softly beside me. A nurse entered the room, her smile warm but strained. "You've been missing for 40 years, she said gently. "Welcome back." 40 years? Impossible. But as I sat up, catching sight of my reflection in the window, I knew she was right. My hair was white, my face lined with age. And yet, inside, I felt unchanged, trapped. Now, every night, I dream of the bridge, of the figure at the other end. Sometimes, when I wake, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my door slow, deliberate, getting closer with each passing day. And sometimes, I wonder if running was the right choice after all. Next story. My friend changed after entering the tunnel. It started with a text, a simple, innocent message from my best friend since childhood, Jason. It read, "Hey, you want to check out that old tunnel behind the factory? I heard it leads somewhere cool." I paused, staring at the screen for what felt like minutes. That tunnel. I'd seen it before, but never dared to go near it. Everyone in town whispered about it, the way it seemed to stretch on forever, how no one who ventured inside ever came back quite the same. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it wasn't even real, just a story made up by kids trying to scare each other, but Jason had always been reckless, adventurous. And if he wanted to explore it, then surely it couldn't be that bad, right? Wrong. We met after school, as usual. Jason was already waiting for me outside his house, leaning casually against his bike. He grinned when he saw me approach, that familiar, lopsided smile of his lighting up his face. "You ready?" he asked, tossing me a flashlight. Yeah, I lied. Truthfully, I wasn't sure why I agreed to come along. Maybe it was because we hadn't hung out much lately, college applications and exams had kept us apart. Or maybe it was curiosity. Whatever the reason, here I was, walking beside him toward the edge of town where the abandoned factory loomed like a forgotten relic. The air grew colder as we approached the tunnel entrance. Overgrown vines clung to its cracked walls, their shadows swaying unnaturally in the windless evening. My stomach churned as Jason stepped closer, shining his flashlight into the darkness within. "This is it," he said, voice tinged with excitement. "Let's do this." And so we did. We stepped inside together, our footsteps echoing softly against the damp stone floor. At first, everything seemed normal. The tunnel was dark, yes, but not terrifying. Just another forgotten place left to rot over time. But things changed, fast. About halfway through, Jason stopped abruptly. His flashlight beam wavered, casting strange patterns on the walls. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping closer. He turned to look at me, but something was off. His eyes. They weren't focused. They darted around nervously, almost frantically. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice quieter than usual. Too quiet. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" A long pause followed. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "Never mind, let's keep going." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His tone had shifted subtle enough that anyone else might have missed it, but not me, not someone who'd known him their entire life. As we pressed deeper into the tunnel, the atmosphere began to warp. The silence became oppressive, heavy with an unspoken dread. Every sound echoed strangely, distorted beyond recognition. Even our own breathing sounded alien, reverberating down the narrow passageway like whispers from faraway voices. Jason stumbled once or twice, though he didn't seem to notice. When I reached out to steady him, he flinched away, his movements jerky and unnatural. "You okay?" I pressed, concern creeping into my voice. "Fine," he snapped, more sharply than I'd ever heard him speak. Then, softer, almost apologetic. "Sorry, just tired, I guess." Tired? Something about that explanation rang false, but I didn't push further. Not yet. It happened gradually, at first little things that should have set off alarm bells immediately, but somehow slipped under my radar, like the way Jason kept forgetting details about our past conversations. "We should have brought snacks," he remarked suddenly, breaking the tense silence between us. "What?" I frowned. "You were the one who said we wouldn't need them." He blinked, confusion clouding his features. "No, I didn't say that. You did." "No, I didn't," I argued, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Are you serious right now?" For a moment he stared at me, unblinking. Then he shrugged, dismissing the topic entirely. That wasn't the only oddity. There were other small inconsistencies that gnawed at the edges of my mind. His laugh sounded different, higher-pitched and strained. His gait had altered too. Instead of his usual confident stride, he moved stiffly, almost robotically. Worst of all, there were moments when his gaze would linger on me for just a second too long, as though studying me, analyzing me. By the time we reached the midpoint of the tunnel, a crumbling archway marked with faded graffiti, I could barely contain my unease. "Jason," I began hesitantly, "are you sure you're all right? You've been acting weird since we came in here?" His response caught me completely off guard. "Weird? What are you talking about?" He tilted his head slightly, the motion unsettling in its deliberate slowness. "I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?" "But—" "No buts." His voice cut across mine, sharp and final. Let's finish this, okay?" I swallowed hard, nodding despite the growing pit in my stomach. Something was very, very wrong, and whatever it was, it had taken hold of Jason. The deeper we went, the worse it got. The tunnel itself seemed to twist and turn unpredictably, leading us in circles despite our best efforts to track our progress. Walls appeared where none had been before, blocking paths we swore we'd passed earlier. Echoes multiplied, overlapping until they formed unintelligible murmurs that sent shivers down my spine. And Jason... Oh, Jason. He stopped speaking altogether after a while, content to trudge silently ahead of me. Occasionally, he'd glance back, his expression unreadable. Sometimes I thought I saw recognition flicker in his eyes, the Jason I knew, but those moments were fleeting, vanishing almost as soon as they appeared. Then came the incident with the handprint. We were standing near a particularly narrow section of the tunnel when Jason suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me close. "Look," he whispered, pointing at the wall beside him. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just more cracked stone covered in layers of grime. But then I noticed a faint impression pressed into the surface as though someone had slammed their palm against it with tremendous force. Except, it wasn't human. The fingers were elongated, the thumb positioned unnaturally low. The entire print radiated an aura of wrongness, making my skin crawl. "That's not possible," I stammered, backing away instinctively. "It is," Jason replied, his voice eerily calm, "and it's coming for us." Before I could respond, he shoved me forward, urging me to run. "Go," he shouted. "Get out of here." I obeyed, stumbling blindly through the labyrinthine passages. Behind me, I heard footsteps not ours, but heavier, dragging. Each step resonated through the tunnel like thunder, shaking the ground beneath my feet. When I finally stopped running, panting and disoriented, I realized Jason was nowhere in sight. Panic surged through me as I called out his name over and over again. No answer. Only the eerie silence of the tunnel greeted me. Until a soft chuckle echoed behind me. Turning slowly, I found myself face to face with Jason, or rather, something pretending to be him. His appearance had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. His eyes glowed faintly now, their irises swirling with unnatural hues. His smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting his face in two. "You shouldn't have come here," he intoned, voice deep and resonant, layered with countless others. "What are you?" I demanded, backing away. "Oh, I'm still your friend," he cooed, advancing steadily. "Just better, stronger. Don't worry, you'll understand soon enough." "No!" I screamed, turning tail and bolting once more. But no matter how fast I ran, his laughter pursued me, filling the tunnel with an unbearable cacophony of mocking voices. And then, just as I thought I might lose him for good, I heard Ida's faint whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." The voice was unmistakable. It belonged to the real Jason. I froze, torn between hope and terror. Should I go back? Could I trust what I'd heard? Before I could decide, a cold hand closed around my ankle, yanking me backward. Looking down, I saw a face emerging from the shadows of face identical to mine. "Your turn," it whispered, dragging me into the abyss. When I woke, I was alone. The tunnel stood empty, its entrance yawning open like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. Shaking, I staggered out into the sunlight, gasping for breath. But as I glanced at my reflection in a nearby puddle, I noticed something strange. My eyes. They weren't mine anymore. They glowed faintly, swirling with colors I couldn't name. And somewhere deep inside, I heard Jason's voice calling my name. Only this time, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a warning. Next story. We woke up in the wrong universe. It was supposed to be just another night. We had been driving for hours, Sarah and I. She sat in the passenger seat, humming softly along with some old indie song on the radio, the kind of music you only listen to when no one else is around. It felt good, quiet, peaceful. We were heading back from a weekend getaway, our little cabin nestled deep within the woods now far behind us. Neither of us wanted to talk much. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words ever could. The hotel we stopped at wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. A small roadside inn, its neon sign flickering faintly in the rain that had started sometime after midnight. Vacancy. It read, or maybe it said vacant. I couldn't quite tell through the haze of exhaustion clouding my vision. Inside, the room smelled faintly of mildew, though not unpleasantly so. 2 twin beds, a cracked mirror above the dresser, and a television mounted crookedly on the wall completed the scene. There was nothing unusual about any of this. Just another stopover before returning home. Sarah stretched out on her bed, pulling off her boots without complaint. Her eyes met mine briefly before she rolled onto her side, facing away from me. "Good night," she murmured, her voice already heavy with sleep. "Night," I replied softly, tugging up the covers on my own bed. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic patter of rain against the window. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted, its call echoing eerily into the darkness. My eyelids grew heavier, and soon enough, the world faded into blackness. When I opened my eyes again, something felt off. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, the kind of thing you might brush off as fatigue or disorientation upon waking. But then it lingered, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness like a splinter under your skin. The clock on the bedside table read 3:17 a.m., but the numbers seemed blurred as if smeared by invisible fingers. Blinking, I squinted harder, trying to focus. They sharpened momentarily, only to blur once more. Frowning, I reached out to touch eye-tanned froze. Because the clock wasn't there anymore. My hand hovered over empty space where moments earlier the glowing digits had rested. Panic bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to rise, but I forced myself to breathe deeply. Maybe I'd imagined it. Or perhaps I hadn't fully woken yet. Turning my head, I glanced towards Sarah's bed, except it wasn't Sarah lying there. Instead, a woman with long, dark hair sprawled across the mattress, her face partially obscured by shadows cast from the dim light filtering through the blinds. Her breathing was slow, steady, but unfamiliar. This wasn't Sarah, not even close. And yet, when I called out her name attentively, hesitantly she stirred. She blinked awake, her expression groggy but warm. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Then she smiled a smile that should have belonged to someone else entirely. For a moment, I simply stared at her, unable to reconcile what I saw with what I knew. "What? Who are you?" I whispered, my throat dry. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "It's me, Sarah. What's wrong?" But it wasn't Sarah. Not really. Something was different. Everything was slightly off. As we stumbled out of the hotel room and into the cool morning air, the strangeness continued to mount. At first glance, everything appeared normal, the same streets, the same buildings, but closer inspection revealed discrepancies too numerous to ignore. The motel itself bore a new name painted in bold letters across its facade. The Welcoming Arms Inn. That wasn't right. Last night, it had clearly been called something else. And the parking lot? Empty save for a single car parked near the entrance, see a sleek black sedan whose make and model I couldn't place. "Do you remember checking in here last night?" I asked Sarah cautiously, keeping my tone neutral despite the unease churning inside me. She frowned, glancing around. "Of course, why wouldn't I?" "But did the sign say Welcoming Arms?" "No." She paused, her gaze narrowing. "Wait, are you saying it didn't?" "I'm saying I don't think it did." Her lips pressed together in thought. For a second, I thought I detected uncertainty flickering across her features, but then it vanished, replaced by certainty. "You must have dreamed it," she said firmly. "Come on, let's grab breakfast." Breakfast turned out to be equally unsettling. The diner we entered looked familiar enough, down to the vinyl booths and Formica countertops, yet the menu items listed dishes neither of us recognized. Pancakes made from squid ink batter, coffee brewed with lavender instead of beans. Even the waitress seemed peculiar, her movements robotic, her smile fixed unnaturally wide. "What do you want?" she asked brusquely, pen poised over her pad. I hesitated, glancing at Sarah. I'll have pancakes." "Squid ink or chocolate swirl?" she prompted. "Just regular pancakes," I insisted. She tilted her head, puzzled. Regular isn't an option. Before I could argue further, Sarah interjected smoothly, ordering both our meals. As she spoke, I noticed how differently she carried herself compared to the night before. Her accent sounded thicker, almost foreign. Words spilled from her mouth in patterns that felt unnatural, clipped syllables punctuating each sentence. By the time our food arrived, I barely touched it. Each bite tasted wrong, not bad, exactly, but altered somehow. Like biting into an apple, expecting sweetness only to find bitterness instead. "This isn't real," I muttered under my breath, pushing the plate aside. Sarah sighed heavily, setting down her fork. Listen, I know you're tired, but maybe you should get some fresh air. You're acting paranoid. Paranoid? Was I, or was she? Throughout the day, the distortions worsened. Landmarks shifted positions unexpectedly. Streets ended abruptly, leading nowhere. People we passed greeted us enthusiastically, calling us names we didn't recognize. Hey, Jake. Long time no see, a man shouted cheerfully as we walked past a park bench. I froze mid-step, turning to face him. Excuse me, I think you've got the wrong person. My name's Alex. He chuckled, shaking his head. Alex? No way. You've always gone by Jake. Since high school, remember? High school? What was he talking about? I'd never met this guy in my life. Sarah stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. Ignore him, she murmured quietly. He's drunk. But was he? Or was I? Doubt crept in like frost spreading across glass. How could anyone be sure of anything in a world like this? Later, while browsing through a convenience store, I picked up a newspaper dated yesterday. The headlines screamed of events I couldn't possibly recall happening: a presidential assassination, an alien landing in Siberia. None of it made sense. What's going on? I demanded aloud, clutching the paper tightly. Sarah sighed again, her patience wearing thin. Maybe you hit your head last night, or maybe you're just stressed. Either way, obsessing over this isn't helping. Was she right? Was I losing my grip on reality, or was she part of whatever illusion trapped me here? That evening, we found ourselves back at the motel, or rather, what passed for the motel. Its appearance had changed yet again, now bearing the name Shelter Haven Lodge. Inside, the decor differed drastically, modern furnishings replacing outdated ones, walls painted bright yellow rather than beige. In the bathroom, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, only it wasn't quite me. My features remained identical, but my expression lagged behind my actual emotions, delayed by fractions of a second. When I raised my hand, the image followed suit, but sluggishly, as though swimming through molasses. Panic surged anew. I spun away from the mirror, backing into the doorframe. Sarah, I cried, something's seriously wrong. She appeared instantly, concern etched onto her face. But when she peered into the mirror beside me, she saw nothing amiss. I don't understand, she admitted finally. To me, it looks fine. Fine? How could she possibly think? And then I realized she wasn't seeing the same thing I was. Whatever rift existed between us stretched wider with every passing moment. Worse still, certain sequences began repeating themselves. Conversations replayed verbatim, actions mimicked precisely, time looped endlessly, trapping us in an eternal present tense. By the third day, or was it the fifth? A revelation struck me. Hidden among the chaos lay clues pointing to one horrifying truth: we weren't merely lost in a parallel universe. No, this was something far more sinister. A fragment of memory surfaced unbidden: a lab coat, sterile equipment, wires snaking toward electrodes attached to my temples. Experiments. They'd experimented on me, on us. Manipulating perception, altering reality itself until we couldn't distinguish dream from waking life. They sent us here, I whispered hoarsely to Sarah, who stood frozen beside me. They deliberately pushed us into this simulation. Her response came swiftly, cutting through my burgeoning despair. Who? Who would do such a thing? I shook my head helplessly. I don't know, but whoever they are, they're watching us right now. As dusk descended once more, casting eerie shadows across the landscape, I spotted something or someone out of the corner of my eye. Across the street, walking leisurely along the sidewalk, was another version of myself, identical in every detail except one. His eyes gleamed coldly, devoid of warmth or humanity. Our gazes locked briefly, and in that instant I understood. He wasn't me, he was them, their creation, their puppet. Behind me, Sarah gasped sharply. Did you see that? Yes, I breathed, terror gripping my chest. And there's no way back.
Next story. The pale thing in the cornfield. I saw it between the stalks. I don't know where to begin. I suppose I should start with the cornfields, those endless rows of green, stretching out like a sea under the summer sun. They were everywhere when I came back home. Or what used to be my home. My family's farm sat nestled between them, surrounded by acres upon acres of stalks, so tall they seemed to scrape the sky. It was supposed to be temporary, a few weeks, helping out before heading back to the city, but something about those fields felt wrong from the moment I arrived. The first night, I didn't think much of it. Just some strange noises coming from outside my bedroom window, rustling sounds, faint but persistent, as though something or someone was moving through the crops. But there wasn't any wind that evening. Not even a breeze stirred the air inside the house, yet the sound continued, soft and deliberate, almost rhythmic. At first, I told myself it was just mice or squirrels, or maybe one of the stray dogs that sometimes wandered onto our property. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't alone. And then there was the snapping sound, a sharp crack, like a branch breaking, or no, not a branch, a cornstalk. I froze, staring at the curtains covering my window. Beyond them lay the field, its dark silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. For a second, I thought I saw a movementa, pale flash, quick and fleeting, slipping away into the shadows. But when I squinted harder, trying to make sense of it, all I could see were the endless rows of corn swaying ever so slightly, as if mocking me. It wasn't until later that I realized how foolish I'd been to ignore it. By day, everything seemed normal. The fields shimmered in the heat, their leaves whispering together whenever a gentle gust passed through. Dad would send me out to check on things, make sure the irrigation lines weren't clogged, count the ears ready for harvest. I'd trudge along the dirt paths cutting through the crop, feeling nothing more than sweat dripping down my neck and the weight of the sun above me. But at night, everything changed. The whispers started small. At first, it was just Mom. She mentioned offhandedly over dinner one evening, "You know, your grandfather always said there was something strange about these fields." Her voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. Though she tried to play it off as a joke, he claimed he once saw a figure out there late at night, said it looked human, but too thin, too pale, like it didn't belong here. Dad snorted, dismissing her words with a wave of his hand. "Your grandpa liked his whiskey," he said gruffly. "If you ask me, he probably mistook a scarecrow for a ghost." Mom laughed nervously, but I noticed the way her eyes darted toward the window behind him. Neither of them brought it up again after that. Still, I wondered, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was stupidity. But part of me wanted to find out for myself whether there was anything to the old stories. So one night, armed only with a flashlight and a stubborn streak, I decided to venture into the cornfield. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, pressing down on my chest like an invisible hand. As I stepped off the porch and into the field, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. Then came the smelty, earthy tang of soil mixed with the sharp sweetness of crushed husks. It filled my nostrils, clinging to every breath I took. I shone the flashlight beam ahead, carving a narrow path through the towering stalks. Everything looked the same, row after row of identical plants, their leaves brushing against each other with a dry rustle. But as I walked deeper, the light began to falter. Shadows pooled around me, darker than they should have been, swallowing the glow of my flashlight whole. It was disorienting, like stepping into another world entirely. And then I heard it. A sound not loud but unmistakable, something moving nearby, not footsteps exactly, more like dragging, uneven and halting as if whatever made it wasn't walking properly. My heart leapt into my throat, and I swung the flashlight wildly, searching for the source. Nothing, just the endless rows of corn, standing silent and still. Or so I thought. There it was again, this time closer, louder, a snap, another stalk breaking, followed by the wet crunch of something shifting through the undergrowth. My pulse raced, pounding in my ears. I told myself to turn around, to head back to the safety of the house, but my feet wouldn't obey. Instead, I pressed forward, drawn by some primal need to understand what lurked within those walls of green. That's when I saw caught a glimpse of it. Out of the corner of my eye, a flash of pale skin gliding between the stalks. Too pale, almost translucent, and moving wrong. Jerky, unnatural movements, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen strings. Its limbs stretched impossibly long, reaching further than they should have, twisting in ways that defied logic. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Whatever it was, it had seen me now. I could feel its gaze boring into me, cold and unblinking, even though I couldn't see its face. Panic surged through me, overriding reason. Without thinking, I turned and ran. Running through a cornfield in the dark is not easy. The stalks clawed at my arms, snagging my clothes, forcing me to zigzag through the maze-like rows. Behind me, I could hear it following breathing, ragged and labored, each exhalation a hot gust against the base of my neck. Sometimes I thought I could feel its fingers grazing my skin, though whenever I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing there. Eventually, I burst free of the field, tumbling onto the hard-packed dirt road leading back to the house. The creature didn't follow me beyond the edge of the crops, but I knew it was still watching. I could sense its presence lingering just out of sight, waiting patiently for me to return. When I finally reached the safety of the porch, I collapsed against the doorframe, trembling uncontrollably. Inside, Mom called out worriedly, asking why I was shaking so badly. I lied, telling her I'd tripped and scraped my knee. She didn't press me further, but I saw the concern etched across her face. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe exhaustion had gotten to me, or perhaps I really had imagined the whole thing. But the signs kept piling up. More rustling sounds at night, more snapped stalks littering the ground near the house. And worst of all, faint outlines appearing in the distance during sunrise tall, gangly figures standing motionless among the corn, their faces obscured by the morning haze. One morning, I swore I saw one of them looking directly at me, its head tilted slightly, as if studying me before melting back into the rows. When I told Dad about it, he dismissed it with a grunt. "Probably just a deer," he muttered, refilling his coffee cup. But his knuckles went white around the handle, and for the first time I noticed the revolver tucked into the waistband of his jeans. The final confrontation happened on the last night I spent there. By then, I knew better than to go near the fields alone, but desperation drove me anyway. I needed answers, closure, anything to explain what was happening. Armed with a lantern this time, I ventured back into the depths of the crop, determined to confront whatever dwelled within. This time, it found me first. I remember the moment vividly. The lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows across the stalks surrounding me. Then, without warning, the creature emerged from the darkness. It stood mere feet away, illuminated briefly by the wavering light. Its form was gaunt, skeletal, its skin stretched taut over protruding bones. Eyes black voids, devoid of life, stared straight into mine, unblinking and unyielding. Its mouth opened wide, revealing jagged teeth stained with something dark and sticky. Before I could scream, it lunged. Time slowed as I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its outstretched claws. The lantern fell, spilling oil onto the ground and igniting a small fire. The flames roared to life, illuminating the area brightly enough to reveal dozens of similar shapes lurking in the periphery, their forms distorted and monstrous. In that instant, I understood. These weren't animals or spirits. They were something else entirely. Something ancient, malevolent, and hungry. Somehow, I managed to escape. Whether it was luck or sheer terror driving me, I bolted through the field faster than I ever had before, ignoring the pain as thorns tore at my flesh. When I reached the house, I slammed the door shut behind me, barricading it with furniture, despite knowing it wouldn't hold forever. Now, sitting here in the quiet darkness, I listened to the sounds outside, rustling, snapping, breathing. Every night it grows louder, closer. Whatever it is, it's getting bolder, braver. Soon I fear it won't stop at the edge of the field anymore. If you're hearing this, please believe me. There's something out there, something that doesn't belong, and it's coming for us. Is anyone still listening? Next story. Haunted hospital corridors, true night shift horror, lonely hospital night shift. The hospital smelled like death. Not the clean antiseptic kind you might expect from a sterile environment, but something deeper and older like decay seeping into every crack of the walls. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as soon as Sarah stepped through the heavy double doors leading to Wing E, it hit her full force. She clutched her clipboard tighter and tried to shake off the chill that ran down her spine. It wasn't supposed to be this bad. When she'd accepted the job as a night shift janitor at St. Blanc, Mercy General Hospital, they'd told her it would be simple maintenance work. Mopping floors, restocking supplies, emptying trash bins. They hadn't mentioned the dimly lit hallways, the creaking floorboards, or the unsettling silence broken only by the occasional hum of malfunctioning equipment. And certainly, no one had warned her about Wing F, a part of the hospital that felt less like a medical facility and more like a haunted house. Sarah adjusted her radio on her belt for what felt like the 100th time since starting her shift. Static buzzed intermittently, making her wonder if anyone could even hear her calls anymore. "Dispatch?" she said softly, her voice trembling despite herself. No response, just static. She sighed and pressed forward, telling herself to focus on the task at hand. Wing E was eerie even during the day, with its long corridors lined with cracked paint and faded signs pointing toward rooms that hadn't been used in years. At night, however, it transformed into something else entirely, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. The lights above flickered erratically, casting dancing patterns across the peeling wallpaper. Every step echoed unnaturally loud, amplifying the sense of isolation. As Sarah pushed her mop bucket down the hallway, she noticed something odd. One of the patient call buttons near room 317 was blinking furiously, though the room itself remained dark and locked. Frowning, she approached cautiously, half expecting to find some sort of technical glitch. But when she pressed her ear against the door, she swore she heard soft murmurs coming from inside. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Silence answered her. Still, the call button continued to blink insistently, as though mocking her hesitation. After several seconds of staring at it, she finally reached out and pressed the reset button. The light stopped flashing immediately, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. Shaking her head, Sarah chalked it up to paranoia. Maybe the stress of working alone was getting to her, or maybe it was just the creepy atmosphere of the place. Whatever the reason, she decided not to dwell on it too much. There were plenty of other things to do before her shift ended. Or so she thought. By the time Sarah reached the far end of the corridor, the unease had grown palpable. The air seemed colder here, despite the lack of windows or ventilation systems. Her breath fogged slightly in front of her face, and goosebumps erupted along her arms. Then came the sound of low, rhythmic thumping, almost like someone knocking on a wall. It started faintly, but grew louder with each passing second until it filled the entire hallway. She froze mid-step, gripping the handle of her mop bucket like a lifeline. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to keep her tone steady. Again, silence followed her question. Yet the thumping persisted, growing faster now, almost frantic. Without thinking, Sarah turned and sprinted back toward the main entrance of Wing E. Her shoes slapped against the tiled floor, creating a cacophony that drowned out everything else. By the time she reached the safety of the nurse's station, her chest heaved with exertion and sweat dripped down her forehead. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe she'd imagined the whole thing. Hospitals were old buildings, after all. Pipes burst, wiring shorted out. It was probably nothing more than that. But then the security camera feed began acting up. Sitting behind the desk, Sarah watched as the monitors displayed grainy black and white images of the various sections of Wing E. Most of them showed nothing unusual, just empty hallways bathed in dim emergency lighting. But one screen caught her attention immediately. It was angled toward the ICU wing, which had been decommissioned years ago due to budget cuts. In the footage, a shadow moved across the frame, pausing briefly near bed 5 before disappearing completely. Her pulse quickened. Shadows didn't move unless something or someone was causing them to. Yet the ICU wing hadn't seen a single patient in over a decade. Who or what could possibly be there? Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah dug through the hospital archives stored in an old filing cabinet near the break room. Dust coated the folders, evidence of how rarely anyone accessed these records anymore. As she flipped through pages filled with handwritten notes and typed reports, one name kept appearing again and again: Dr. Evelyn Carter. Dr. Carter had been a renowned surgeon known for her groundbreaking work in cardiac care. However, her story took a dark turn one fateful night in Wing E. According to the files, she'd been called to the ICU to perform an emergency procedure on a young woman suffering from internal bleeding. Despite her best efforts, the surgery failed, and the patient died shortly afterward. What made the case particularly strange was the fact that none of the other staff members present that night could recall seeing Dr. Carter enter the operating room. Some claimed she simply vanished midway through the procedure, while others insisted she never existed in the first place. Even stranger was the testimony of Nurse Linda Thompson, who worked alongside Dr. Carter that evening. In her statement, Linda described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread as soon as she entered the ICU. She claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the room, whispering unintelligible phrases directly into her ears. By morning, Linda had quit her job, refusing ever to return to St. Mercy. Sarah closed the folder slowly, her mind racing. If what she read was true, then perhaps Wing E really was cursed. But why? And why did it seem determined to drag her into its web of terror? With trembling hands, Sarah retrieved her flashlight from the supply closet and ventured deeper into Wing E than she'd ever dared before. Her destination was clear: the abandoned ICU wing where the phantom Dr. Astor Kane Mays Tuthap Carter supposedly met her demise. Along the way, the phenomena intensified. Lights blinked erratically, machinery beeped without cause, and distant footsteps echoed through the halls, always staying just out of sight. When she finally reached the ICU, she found the door slightly ajar, despite being firmly shut earlier that evening. Pushing it open, she shone her flashlight inside, revealing rows of dusty hospital beds covered in white sheets. Each bed bore the faint outline of a body beneath it, as though waiting for occupants who would never arrive. And then she saw her. Standing at the far end of the room was a figure draped in a blood-stained surgical gown. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its presence radiated malice. Sarah stumbled backward, nearly dropping her flashlight as the entity turned to face her fully. A guttural growl escaped its lips, vibrating through the air like thunder. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that instant, Sarah understood. This wasn't just the spirit of Dr. Carter. It was the embodiment of all the pain, loss, and despair that had accumulated within these walls over the years, and it wanted her to join it. Sarah bolted from the ICU, her heart hammering in her chest as she raced back toward the exit. Behind her, the wailing cries of countless souls echoed through the halls, urging her to stay. She fought the urge to look back, knowing that doing so might seal her fate forever. Somehow, she managed to escape Wing E, collapsing onto the cold concrete outside as dawn broke over the horizon. Gasping for air, she pulled out her phone and dialed emergency services, reporting everything she'd experienced. To her surprise, the operator sounded skeptical, dismissing her claims as mere exhaustion and stress. Days later, Sarah returned to St. Mercy to collect her final paycheck. Upon entering the building, however, she noticed something peculiar. All the cameras monitoring Wing E displayed static instead of live footage. Confused, she asked the daytime staff about it. Their response chilled her to the bone. "Wing E doesn't exist," one of them replied matter-of-factly. "It was demolished years ago." Sarah glanced down at her ID badge, suddenly unsure whether she truly left the haunted corridors or if she was still trapped within them, doomed to relive the nightmare indefinitely. Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The Whisper That Breathed. A summer storm brewed over Boston, its dark clouds casting long shadows across the narrow streets of Beacon Hill. The air was thick with humidity, and the faint scent of rain mingled with the salty breeze from the nearby harbor. At precisely 5 in the afternoon, when the sun should have still been high, an unnatural twilight descended upon the city. Andrew Scott hurried down Pinckney Street, his leather satchel slapping against his side with each quickened step. The first rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, vibrating through the cobblestones beneath his worn loafers. He had taken this route home 1,000 times before, but today something felt different. The usual sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, dogs barking, the occasional car engine, were strangely muted. Only the wind seemed alive, whispering through the ancient trees that lined the street, whispering in a way that made Andrew's skin prickle. He glanced at the old Victorian house at number 17, its windows dark and unwelcoming despite the early hour. The for sale sign in the yard swayed gently, though he couldn't feel any breeze on his face. Madison Rivera stood at her kitchen window on Mount Vernon Street, staring out at the gathering storm. Her teacup trembled slightly in her hand as she watched the clouds churn above the gold dome of the State House. She had lived in this neighborhood her entire life, but never had she seen such an ominous sky this early in the evening. The antique clock on her wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching longer than it should. Something about the atmosphere felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In the South End, James Cooper sat alone in his apartment on Tremont Street, absently flipping through old photographs. The lightning flashed outside, illuminating his collection of vintage cameras displayed on the shelves. His fingers paused on a particular picture, a group of friends gathered at Boston Common, smiling faces frozen in time. But as another bolt of lightning illuminated the room, he could have sworn one of the faces in the photograph moved, just for a moment. Just enough to make his heart skip a beat. The frame fell from his hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. Andrew found himself drawn to the old cemetery at the top of Copp's Hill. The wrought iron gates creaked open before him, though he was certain he hadn't touched them. The gravestones stood like silent sentinels, their weathered inscriptions barely visible in the dim light. As he walked between the rows, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't words exactly, more like fragments of memories or thoughts that didn't belong to him. A cold droplet of rain hit his cheek, followed by another. The storm was getting closer, the thunder growing more insistent, yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. Madison's phone rang suddenly, making her jump. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, only the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, measured breaths that seemed to echo in her ear. The connection remained open, the breathing continuing without variation. She wanted to hang up, but her fingers wouldn't move. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the room despite the summer heat. James had gathered the broken pieces of the photograph frame and was attempting to reconstruct it when he noticed something odd. The image inside had changed. Where once there had been 6 smiling faces, now there were 7. The new face wasn't clear, just a blur of features that seemed to shift when he tried to focus on them. The room temperature dropped suddenly, and his breath came out in visible puffs. From somewhere deep within the walls, he heard a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across wood, getting closer with each passing moment. The rain began to fall in earnest now, drumming against rooftops and streaming down window panes throughout the city. Andrew found himself standing before a particular gravestone, its inscription worn almost smooth by time. Yet he could read it perfectly in his mind. Elizabeth Hargrove, 1845–1865. The name triggered something in his memory, though he couldn't place why. The whispers around him formed words now, disjointed phrases that painted pictures of a life cut tragically short. Never meant to. Kept calling me back. So cold here. Madison finally managed to end the call, dropping the phone on the counter with shaking hands. The lights flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. She moved to check the circuit breaker, but stopped when she saw her reflection in the hallway mirror. It wasn't quite right, her eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. She blinked, and the reflection smiled while she remained expressionless. The breathing from the phone call continued behind her, though no device was near. "You shouldn't have answered," it seemed to say, so softly she might have imagined it. James had barricaded himself in his bedroom, the photograph hidden safely in a drawer. The scraping had stopped, replaced by a gentle tapping at his window. When he looked, there was nothing there except the distorted reflection of his room. But something about the angles was off, as if space itself had bent slightly out of shape. His cameras, usually arranged with precise care, were now facing inward, their lenses trained on his bed. "They see you," he whispered to himself, though he wasn't sure where the words came from. The storm outside reached its peak, lightning flashing continuously, yet the darkness in his room deepened rather than lifted. The three of them, Andrew, Madison, James, were connected by threads they couldn't see, drawn together by forces beyond their understanding. Each had experienced strange occurrences before, dismissing them as coincidence or imagination. But now, as the storm battered Boston and the boundaries between worlds grew thin, they would be forced to confront the truth. Elizabeth Hargrove's story wasn't finished, and somehow they had become part of its conclusion. Andrew traced his fingers along the edge of the gravestone, feeling the rough stone bite into his skin. The pain was real, grounding him when everything else felt surreal. The whispers told him things, terrible things, about what had happened here all those years ago. A forbidden love, a desperate plea, a final betrayal. The rain soaked through his clothes, but he barely noticed. In his mind's eye, he could see her, Elizabeth, young and beautiful, standing at the edge of the hill, looking out toward the harbor. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the storm. But he could feel them, resonating in his chest like a second heartbeat. Madison had retreated to her basement, seeking sanctuary from whatever haunted her home. The old furnace hummed in the corner, its rhythm matching the breathing that now filled every room. Boxes stacked against the walls contained fragments of her family's history, generations of Riveras who had lived and died in this very house. She opened one at random, finding a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Girls' Mysterious Death Shocks Community." The date was June 12, 1865. The photograph showed a girl who looked remarkably like her, standing beside a man whose face was obscured by shadow. He promised, the breathing seemed to say. But he lied. James discovered something in his closet, a small wooden box he didn't remember owning. Inside were letters, written in elegant script that faded even as he read them. They spoke of longing and loss, of meetings in secret places, of promises broken under duress. The last letter ended abruptly. "If you're reading this, then I have failed. Tell them what he did, tell them how he silenced me, the whispers will guide you." The room temperature plummeted, frost forming on the inside of his window. Outside, something moved between the flashes of lightning, something that shouldn't exist in this world. Find them. It breathed. All of you. The storm reached its crescendo, lightning striking the gold dome of the State House with a deafening crack. For a moment, everything went white, and when vision returned, the city seemed subtly altered. Shadows fell differently, familiar landmarks appeared slightly skewed, people walking in the streets moved as if underwater, their faces blank masks. Those who had been touched by Elizabeth's story felt the change most acutely. Their senses heightened, their perceptions expanded beyond normal limits. Sounds carried from impossible distances. Smells lingered long after their sources disappeared. Touches left imprints that glowed faintly in the dark. Andrew found himself unable to leave the cemetery. The gates had vanished, replaced by an endless expanse of tombstones stretching in all directions. Each bore Elizabeth's name, each marked a different year of death. The whispers became a chorus now, overlapping voices telling conflicting versions of the same tragedy. Some claimed she had thrown herself from the hill in despair, others insisted she had been pushed. All agreed on one thing: justice had never been served. The rain continued to fall, but it wasn't water anymore, it was memories, each drop carrying fragments of lives cut short, hopes dashed, loves lost. Madison's basement had transformed into a labyrinth of family secrets. Every box she opened contained evidence of her ancestors' involvement in Elizabeth's fate, letters of condemnation, witness statements, a blood-stained handkerchief, photographs showing the same shadowy figure across generations, always present at moments of tragedy. The breathing grew louder, surrounding her like a physical presence. "You know him," it rasped. "He watches still." She looked up to see her own reflection in the basement window, but instead of her face, she saw the Shadow Man's features clearly for the first time. Their eyes met, and she understood everything that had been hidden, everything that had been denied. James's apartment building had emptied of all other tenants, leaving him alone with the entity that had been watching him through his cameras. The photographs on his walls had changed. Each now showed the same scene. Elizabeth standing at the edge of Copp's Hill, reaching out to someone just out of frame. The seventh figure in his broken photograph had clarified, revealing features that matched the Shadow Man from Madison's past. The wooden box had multiplied, filling his living room with identical copies, each containing variations of the same tragic story. "We are witnesses," the voice whispered directly into his mind, "and we are judged." As the supernatural storm raged, drawing energy from centuries of buried guilt and unresolved grief, the three found themselves converging at number 17 Pinckney Street. The house that had seemed merely old and empty now pulsed with malevolent life. Its windows reflected scenes from the past. Elizabeth's final moments played out endlessly, each iteration slightly different, each ending the same. The front door stood open, inviting them inside to witness the truth. The interior defied physics. Rooms stretched impossibly far, staircases led to nowhere, doors opened onto other dimensions. In the center of it all stood the Shadow Man, finally revealed in full. His face was a composite of every person who had ever turned a blind eye to injustice, every authority figure who had dismissed Elizabeth's pleas for help. "It's time," he said, his voice a chorus of thousands. Time to break the cycle. The house shook violently as reality struggled to contain the weight of so many unresolved wrongs. Andrew, Madison, and James realized simultaneously that they had been chosen not as victims, but as instruments of resolution. Each carried a piece of Elizabeth's story within them. Andrew through his ancestral connection to the hill, Madison through her family's complicity in the cover-up, James through his ability to capture truth in images. Together, they formed a conduit through which Elizabeth's voice could finally be heard, her story told in full, her justice served. The Shadow Man began to dissolve, his form unraveling like smoke caught in a strong wind. "Too late," he whispered, fragments of his essence dispersing into the ether. The truth cannot be contained. The house around them started to collapse, folding in on itself as centuries of lies unraveled. Through the destruction, Elizabeth emerged, not as a ghost, but as a manifestation of collective memory given form. Her eyes held all the sorrow of her age, yet also a spark of hope newly kindled. The storm broke as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind an eerie calm. Number 17 Pinckney Street stood intact once more, its windows dark, and its for sale sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. Andrew, Madison, and James found themselves standing on the sidewalk, drenched and disoriented but whole. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the natural sounds of a city recovering from a summer storm. Lightning flashed one last time, illuminating the hilltop where Elizabeth had stood so long ago. For a brief moment, they thought they saw her silhouette against the darkening sky, her hand raised in farewell. Life in Boston returned to normal, though those who had been touched by the supernatural events carried their experiences like scars, invisible to others, but ever present in their minds. Andrew devoted himself to preserving local history, ensuring that stories like Elizabeth's would never be forgotten again. Madison worked to uncover other buried truths in her family's past, determined to break cycles of silence and denial. James continued taking photographs, but now his lens sought to capture not just images, but essences, the intangible elements that made people who they were. On quiet summer evenings, when storms gathered over the city and the wind whispered through the ancient trees, some claimed they could still hear Elizabeth's voice. Not demanding vengeance, not seeking pity, simply reminding those who would listen that truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it is buried. And sometimes, when passing number 17 Pinckney Street, particularly sensitive souls might catch a glimpse of movement in an upper window or feel a gentle touch on their shoulder, accompanied by the softest of whispers, "Thank you." The story of Elizabeth Hargrove became legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring injustice and the power of collective memory. Her name appeared in historical records, her story told in museums and walking tours. Yet those who had truly known her, Andrew, Madison, James, understood that her presence lingered not in these official accounts, but in the spaces between them. In the moments when the world seemed to hold its breath, when shadows fell just a little too deep, when the wind carried voices from another time, Boston continued its march forward, oblivious to the thin veil separating past from present. Summer storms still rolled in from the Atlantic, lightning still illuminated the gold dome of the State House. Children still played in the shadow of Copp's Hill, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded there so long ago. But somewhere, in the fabric of the city itself, Elizabeth's story continued to resonate. A reminder that some truths refuse to be silenced. Some voices continue to breathe long after their bodies have turned to dust. And on nights when the moon hung low over Beacon Hill, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, those who listen closely might hear it, the whisper that breathed, carrying fragments of a life reclaimed, echoes of justice finally served. Reminders that even in death, truth finds a way to speak through those willing to listen. Screams in the warehouse at night. The winter air in Savannah carried an unusual chill, even for Georgia. The cicadas buzzed incessantly through the humid night as Amelia Thompson tightened her scarf around her neck. She had taken the security job at the old warehouse on the outskirts of town, mostly out of desperation. The building stood like a monolith against the dark sky, its weathered brick walls telling stories of better days when it was part of the thriving port district. Liam Allen, her partner for the night shift, leaned against their patrol car while chewing absent-mindedly on a toothpick. "Third week, and you're still jumpy," he said with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. His attempt at casual conversation couldn't mask the tension in his voice. They both knew something wasn't right about this place. Every night brought new sounds from within the warehouse's walls, sounds that shouldn't exist in an empty building. As they approached the main entrance, Amelia noticed the padlock looked different somehow. The scratches around the hasp seemed fresh, though she could have sworn she'd checked it thoroughly just hours before. Liam must have seen her hesitation because he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Probably just kids messing around again," he said, but his words lacked conviction. Last week, they'd found graffiti inside that definitely hadn't been there during their previous rounds. The heavy metal door groaned in protest as Liam pushed it open. The smell hit them immediately, damp concrete mixed with something metallic that made Amelia's stomach churn. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing rows of empty pallets and dusty machinery. The air felt heavier inside, pressing against their lungs with each breath. Somewhere deep in the shadows, water dripped methodically. Drip, drip, drip. They started their usual patrol route, boots echoing ominously against the concrete floor. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The security cameras mounted high on the walls provided little comfort. Their red lights blinked steadily, but she knew from experience how unreliable they were. Half of them were either broken or showed nothing but static-filled images on the monitor back at their station. "Did you hear that?" Amelia whispered suddenly, grabbing Liam's arm. A soft scraping sound had come from somewhere behind the rows of shelving units. It sounded like metal dragging across concrete. Slow, deliberate. Liam raised his flashlight, the beam trembling slightly despite his best efforts to keep it steady. "Probably just rats," he muttered, though neither of them believed it. The sound came again, closer this time. Closer. Their radios crackled to life without warning, making them both jump. Static filled their ears for several seconds before a distorted voice broke through. "Help me." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. Amelia and Liam exchanged a worried glance. That section of the frequency belonged to local emergency services, not their security channel. They should never have received that transmission here. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as they continued deeper into the warehouse. Their breath formed visible clouds in the beam of their flashlights. Something moved in the corner of Amelia's vision. a shadow too large to be a rat, darting between support columns. When she turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. Just empty space and more shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Liam stopped suddenly, causing Amelia to bump into him. He was staring at something on the floor ahead. At first glance, it looked like oil stains, but as they moved closer, the metallic smell became overwhelming. Blood. Fresh blood leading toward one of the loading docks. The trail glistened wetly in their flashlight beams, ending abruptly at the edge of a large pool that hadn't been there during their last pass through this area. Neither of them spoke as they followed the path, their footsteps careful and measured. The loading dock area proved even colder than the rest of the warehouse. Condensation formed on every surface, dripping steadily from the ceiling beams. What appeared to be claw marks scored deeply into the concrete floor, radiating outward from the blood pool like some terrible flower blooming in reverse. Amelia's radio crackled again, this time with no discernible words, just a rising and falling electronic whine that set her teeth on edge. She fumbled to turn it off, but found the volume control unresponsive. Something heavy shifted in the darkness above them. The sound of movement came from the catwalks high overhead, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the metal structure. Liam's flashlight beam swept upward, catching glimpses of movement too fast to track properly. Whatever it was up there moved with unnatural speed, darting between support beams with impossible agility. The growling grew louder and closer. Amelia's training screamed at her to retreat, to get away from whatever was hunting them in the dark. But something else held her rooted to the spot, a primal curiosity mixed with terror that froze her muscles. The blood pool began to bubble softly, tiny crimson bubbles forming and popping with sickening sounds. From the corner of her eye, she saw shapes moving in the darkness beyond the loading dock doors. Too many shapes to count. The attack came without warning. One moment they were scanning the catwalks, and the next, Liam was gone. His flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling away into the shadows. Amelia heard his muffled scream cut short as something massive dragged him upward into the darkness. Her own scream caught in her throat as she backed away, tripping over her own feet in her haste to escape. The thing on the catwalk let out a triumphant roar that shook dust from the ceiling. She scrambled backward, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the warehouse floor. More figures emerged from the shadows now, surrounding her. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their forms humanoid but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, their limbs bending at impossible angles. The largest figure, presumably what had taken Liam, dropped down from the catwalk with a deafening crash. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, fixing on her with predatory intelligence. The cicadas outside had grown louder, their buzzing almost deafening now. Amelia realized with growing horror that their pattern matched the rhythm of the creature's movements. Each step it took toward her synchronized perfectly with the insect's chorus. The other figures began to circle her, closing in from all sides. Their breathing sounded wet and labored, like liquid being forced through cloth. She pressed herself against a stack of pallets, searching desperately for an escape route. A sudden noise from the office area caught everyone's attention, the distinctive sound of someone trying to force open a window. The creatures hesitated, their heads snapping toward the disturbance with unsettling speed. Amelia seized her chance, diving between two of the smaller figures and sprinting toward the main entrance. Behind her, she heard snarls of frustration as the creatures debated whether to pursue her or investigate the new intruder. Her radio crackled to life again, this time with perfect clarity. "Run!" a woman's voice shouted urgently. "Get out while you still can." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by more static. Amelia didn't question it. She poured everything she had left into reaching the exit. As she burst through the heavy metal door, the cold night air hit her like a slap. The cicadas fell silent all at once, creating an eerie void where their buzzing had been moments before. Standing by their patrol car was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, dressed in tattered clothes and bleeding from multiple wounds. Her eyes widened when she saw Amelia emerge from the warehouse. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered hoarsely. None of us should be here. Before Amelia could respond, the girl collapsed to her knees, pointing weakly back toward the building. They're coming. True to her warning, the warehouse doors slammed shut with enough force to rattle the entire structure. The windows on the upper floors began to glow with an unnatural light, pulsing in time with the now returning cicada chorus. Shadows moved behind the glass in ways that defied physics, stretching and contorting until they seemed to press against the very fabric of reality. Amelia helped the mysterious girl to her feet, noticing for the first time these strange symbols carved into her arms. "We need to move," the girl insisted, pulling Amelia toward the car. "They'll be spreading soon. They always do after a feeding." Her words sent chills down Amelia's spine, not least because she realized dawn was still hours away. The temperature continued to drop, frost forming on nearby surfaces despite the humid air. The warehouse seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, its walls expanding and contracting like living tissue. As they reached the patrol car, Amelia risked one last look back. Dozens of glowing eyes stared out from the warehouse windows, watching them with obvious hunger. Something massive moved behind the glass, its silhouette too large to be contained within the building's walls. The girl shoved her into the passenger seat, taking the wheel herself with surprising strength. "Don't look back," she warned as she started the engine. "Whatever you do, don't look back until we're out of Savannah." The drive through the city streets felt surreal. Streetlights flickered erratically as they passed, and the few people still out at this hour seemed to be walking in slow motion, their faces blank and expressionless. The girl Spiel, who introduced herself only as Rachel, kept checking the rearview mirror obsessively, muttering about spread patterns and infestation zones. Amelia wanted to ask questions, but found herself unable to form coherent thoughts, let alone words. They reached the city limits just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon. Rachel visibly relaxed, though she maintained their speed well above the legal limit. "You got lucky tonight," she said finally. "Most people don't make it out of there alive, especially not after hearing the screams." Amelia opened her mouth to ask what she meant, but Rachel cut her off. "Don't worry about it now. Just know that you've been marked. They'll be watching for you, watching and waiting." The cicadas began their morning song as they left Savannah behind, their buzzing gradually fading into silence. Amelia stared at her reflection in the side window, barely recognizing herself. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes haunted by things she couldn't yet comprehend. In the distance, church bells began to ring, their tones carrying an unexpected sense of finality. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the gathering daylight. Somewhere behind them, in the heart of Savannah's industrial district, the warehouse stood silent and still. Its walls bore fresh scratches and scorch marks that hadn't been there the night before. Inside, pools of blood slowly dried on the concrete floors, already beginning to attract flies. The security cameras remained offline, their lenses cracked and blackened. High above, on the catwalks, something waited patiently for nightfall. Something that remembered the taste of fear. Bunny Man stole a child last night. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Willow Creek, where the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth. The clock struck 9:15 p.m. as Emily Carter sat nervously on her porch, fanning herself against the sticky warmth that refused to dissipate even after sunset. Her younger brother, Jake, played nearby with his best friend, Lily, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets lined with towering oak trees. Unbeknownst to them, the tranquility of this moment would soon shatter into chaos. The Carters lived in a modest house near the edge of a dense forest, a place known locally as Bunny Man Woods. Tales of the Bunny Man, a mysterious figure said to haunt these woods, were whispered among locals, though most dismissed them as mere folklore. Emily, however, had always felt an inexplicable unease whenever she heard those stories. That night, her instincts screamed louder than ever before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Emily noticed something odd about the forest. Its usually calm surface rippled unnaturally, as if stirred by an invisible hand. A faint mist began to rise, curling lazily toward the shore like tendrils of smoke. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the humidity, but then came the sound, a low, guttural growl carried on the breeze, haunting and otherworldly. It sent shivers down her spine, and she instinctively called out to Jake, urging him to come inside. "Jake, time to head home," Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the twilight. The children paused their game momentarily, glancing toward the house. But instead of obeying, Jake hesitated, drawn to the edge of the forest by some unseen force. "Just one more minute," he pleaded, his eyes wide with curiosity. Emily frowned, sensing the growing tension in the air, but reluctantly agreed, promising to keep a close eye on him. Minutes later, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The sky darkened prematurely, clouds rolling in with unnatural speed, blotting out the stars and moon. A cold wind swept through the area, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay, unlike anything Emily had ever smelled before. The laughter of the children faded into silence, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed down on everything around them. And then, from somewhere beyond the tree line, came the sound again, this time clearer, closer, and unmistakably human. "Help me," cried a voice, high-pitched and filled with anguish, reverberating through the night. The words echoed in English, translating to "help me." Each syllable dripped with sorrow, yet beneath it lay a menace that made Emily's blood run cold. She turned sharply toward the forest, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. There, standing knee-deep in the shadows, was a figure cloaked in white, a man with long ears resembling those of a rabbit, his arms outstretched as if beckoning someone forward. "Jake!" Emily screamed, lunging toward her brother just as the child took another step closer to the edge. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, Jake slipped into the murky depths of the forest, vanishing beneath the thick canopy without so much as a splash. Panic surged through Emily as she dove in after him, fighting against the underbrush that seemed stronger than any natural force. Beneath the leaves, she saw shapes, moving sinister figures with hollow eyes and skeletal hands reaching out to drag her deeper. Somehow, Emily managed to claw her way back to the edge of the forest, gasping for air as tears streamed down her face. She searched frantically for any sign of Jake, calling his name over and over until her voice cracked from exhaustion. But there was nothing, no movement, no response, only the eerie silence broken occasionally by the distant echo of the bunny man's cries. Hours passed as searchlights scanned the forest edges and volunteers combed the woods, hoping against hope to find Jake alive. Days turned into weeks, and still no trace of the little boy emerged. The community mourned alongside the Carter family, offering condolences and sharing their own tales of encounters with the bunny man. Some claimed to have seen him wandering the forest edges at night, his ghostly form illuminated by the pale light of the moon. Others spoke of hearing his cries during storms, warning people to stay away from the woods. For Emily, the guilt became unbearable. Every night, she dreamed of that moment, the icy grip of the forest pulling her under, the skeletal hands grabbing at her ankles, and the hollow eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She began hearing things, too soft whispers in the dead of night, footsteps outside her bedroom window, and sometimes faint giggles coming from the direction of the forest. Each sound drove her further into despair, convincing her that the bunny man wasn't done tormenting her family. Months later, when winter settled over Willow Creek, bringing with it biting winds and frost-covered branches, Emily decided she couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a determination born of desperation, she ventured to the forest edge late one night, determined to confront whatever entity had taken her brother. As she stood there, trembling in the cold, she finally saw him clearly, the man with rabbit ears, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of grief and rage. "Why did you take him?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying her with eyes that burned like embers. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, its translucent fingers brushing against Emily's cheek before retreating into the mist. In that instant, Emily understood the spirit hadn't acted out of malice. It had mistaken Jake for one of its own lost children, drawn by the innocence and vulnerability all children share. Though the revelation brought some measure of closure, it did little to ease the pain of losing her brother. Emily continued to visit the forest edge, leaving offerings of flowers and candles in hopes of appeasing the restless soul that haunted its woods. Over time, the sightings of the Bunnyman diminished, as if the spirit had found peace or, perhaps, simply moved on to another place where unsuspecting victims wandered too close to the edge. Even now, years later, Emily carries the memory of that night with her wherever she goes. Every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seems most still, she hears the faintest whisper of a child's laugh or feels the chill of unseen breath against her neck. And though she tells herself repeatedly that it's over, deep down, she can't help but wonder if the Bunnyman is still out there watching, waiting, searching for his next child to claim. Slender Man took my best friend. It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Briarwood, where the air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. The clock read 7:45 p.m. as Megan Carter sat alone in her dimly lit bedroom, scrolling through social media on her phone. Outside, the wind rustled through the towering oak trees, their golden leaves scattering across the yard like confetti. Inside, Megan's house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floors and the soft hum of crickets chirping outside. Her best friend, Clara, had promised to visit earlier that day, but she hadn't shown up yet. Megan wasn't worried. Clara was always running late, but something about the evening felt off. Megan decided to call Clara just to check in. The phone rang twice before being answered, but instead of hearing her friend's familiar voice, there was only silence. "Clara, are you there?" Megan asked, her voice tinged with concern. Still no response, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. A shiver ran down Megan's spine. "Hello? Is someone there?" She tried again, her heart beginning to race. Suddenly, the line went dead, leaving Megan staring at her phone in confusion. She shook it off, telling herself it was probably just a bad connection. But as the hours passed and Clara still didn't show up, Megan's unease grew. By 10:00 p.m., she couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing her coat and flashlight, she headed out into the night to look for her friend. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds being the rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Megan checked all the usual spots, their favorite coffee shop, the park where they used to play as kids, even Clara's house, but there was no sign of her. As Megan walked back toward her own home, she noticed something strange, a figure standing at the edge of the forest near the old abandoned factory. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that stretched impossibly long and thin. Its face was obscured by darkness, but its presence radiated an undeniable menace. Megan froze, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. For what felt like an eternity, the figure simply stood there, watching her with glowing red eyes that burned like embers in the night. Finally, Megan forced herself to move. She turned and sprinted back to her house, slamming the door shut behind her and locking it tightly. Her hands trembled as she dialed Clara's number again, hoping against hope that this time she would answer. But the call went straight to voicemail. Panicked, Megan called Clara's parents next. They sounded just as confused and worried when she told them about the missed meeting and the mysterious figure in the woods. The next morning, Megan and Clara's parents reported her disappearance to the police. Officers arrived at the scene, searching the area thoroughly but finding nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing to indicate anyone had been there recently. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation yielded no results. Clara was gone. vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and lingering fears. Megan struggled to cope with the loss of her best friend. Every night she dreamed of the figure in the woods, its glowing red eyes staring into hers as if trying to communicate something important. Sometimes, in those dreams, she saw Clara too standing beside the figure, her face pale and hollow, her eyes devoid of life. When Megan woke up, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken Clara was still out there, watching and waiting. Desperate for answers, Megan began researching online, digging deeper into local legends and urban myths. That's how she first learned about the Slender Man, a mysterious entity said to haunt forests and deserted areas, preying on unsuspecting victims. Some claimed he acted out of malice, while others believed he was a guardian of sorts, protecting the woods from intruders. Regardless of his motives, the stories shared one common thread: those who encountered him rarely returned. Megan became obsessed with uncovering the truth. She visited libraries, spoke with locals who had heard similar tales, and even ventured back into the forest where she had seen the figure that night. Each trip left her more convinced that the Slender Man was real and that he had taken Clara. Strange things began happening around her house, shadows moving unnaturally in the corners of her vision, whispers echoing through the halls late at night, and occasionally, faint giggles that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Megan decided to try one last thing: a seance. Gathering candles, a Ouija board, and every protective charm she could find, she set up in her basement, hoping to make contact with Clara or whoever else might be listening. At first, nothing happened. The room remained silent, the only sounds being the flickering flames and Megan's rapid breathing. Then, without warning, the planchette on the Ouija board moved, spelling out words in jagged, uneven letters. "Help me," it read. Megan's heart pounded wildly in her chest. Was it really Clara, or was it something else entirely? Before she could ask another question, the lights in the basement flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness before snapping back on again. Megan screamed, covering her ears as a deafening screech filled the air, echoing off the walls and reverberating through her skull. When she opened her eyes, the room was empty. The candles had been extinguished, the Ouija board lay scattered across the floor, and the protective charms hung broken and useless. But in the corner of the room, written in what looked like charcoal, were 3 chilling words. "She's with me now." From that moment on, Megan's life changed forever. Sleep eluded her as she listened helplessly to the whispers that filled her home. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of her vision, and sometimes, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, she swore she heard Clara's voice calling her name softly in the dark. Though she tried to convince herself it was all in her head, deep down, Megan knew better. Years later, Megan rarely speaks of her ordeal. Though grateful to still be alive, she can't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant hasn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Briarwood, the Slender Man still waits, watching, listening, ready to claim his next victim. Missing in the forest like Bigfoot. It was a quiet morning in the small town of Timber Ridge, where the air carried the crisp scent of pine and damp earth. The clock struck 7:15 a.m. as Megan Carter prepared for another day of hiking along her favorite trail, one she had walked countless times before. The trail wound through towering pines and rocky outcrops, offering breathtaking views of the valley below. But this time, something would be different, something no one could have predicted. Megan loved the solitude of the forest, the way it wrapped around her like an old friend. She carried only the essential water bottle, some snacks, and her phone tucked safely into her pocket. As she set off down the trail, boots crunching against the frost-covered leaves, she felt invigorated by the fresh air and the promise of adventure ahead. Yet, as the hours passed and the path grew increasingly isolated, a strange unease began to settle over her. By mid-morning, Megan reached a clearing she knew well, a wide expanse of grass surrounded by ancient trees whose branches stretched skyward like skeletal fingers. It was here that she paused to take in the scenery, snapping a few photos with her phone. That's when she noticed a faint humming sound, barely audible over the rustling leaves and chirping birds. Curious, she turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint its source. The hum grew louder, more insistent, until it filled her ears completely, drowning out all other sounds. Suddenly, the world around her seemed to shift. The once familiar landscape blurred at the edges, colors fading into shades of gray, as if viewed through frosted glass. Megan stumbled backward, disoriented, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "What's happening?" she whispered, clutching her phone tightly, as if it might anchor her to reality. But then, without warning, the device slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the ground and shattering on impact. Panic surged through her as she realized she was completely cut off from help. The clearing now appeared eerily still, the previously lively atmosphere replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against her eardrums. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of her vision, darting between trees and vanishing just as quickly. Megan called out, her voice trembling slightly, but there was no response, only the unsettling sensation of being watched. She tried to retrace her steps, retracing the path she had taken earlier, but each turn led her deeper into unfamiliar territory. The trail markers she relied on were gone, replaced by tangled underbrush and fallen logs that blocked her way. Hours, perhaps minutes. Time seemed distorted, hair passed as Megan wandered aimlessly through the forest, her mind racing with questions. Where had she gone wrong? Why did the trail seem to twist and turn unpredictably, leading her further astray with every step? And most importantly, why did she feel so certain that she wasn't alone? As daylight began to fade, casting long shadows across the ground, Megan spotted something unusual in the distance, a cluster of strange symbols etched into the bark of a nearby tree. They looked almost deliberate, as though carved by human hands, yet their meaning eluded her. Beneath them lay scattered remnants of what appeared to be clothing, a torn piece of fabric, a frayed shoelace, and a single photograph half buried in the dirt. Picking it up carefully, Megan examined the image closely. It depicted a group of people standing together, smiling happily, though none of their faces were familiar to her. What struck her most, however, was the date scrawled on the back years prior to her visit. A cold dread settled in her stomach as realization dawned upon her. These weren't ordinary artifacts, they belonged to others who had vanished without explanation, part of the mysterious phenomenon known locally as missing in the forest. Stories abounded of hikers disappearing under similar circumstances, lured deep into the woods by unexplained forces or simply vanishing into thin air. Some theorized alien abduction, while others pointed to supernatural entities guarding the forest jealously against intruders. Whatever the truth, Megan knew she was caught in the same snare. Night fell swiftly, plunging the forest into darkness, save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. Megan huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of branches and leaves, her body shaking uncontrollably from fear and exhaustion. Around her, strange noises echoed through the night, low growls, haunting whispers, and occasional bursts of laughter that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. Sleep proved impossible, her mind replaying every detail of the day's events in endless loops. Days, perhaps weeks, time remained elusive, hair blurred together as Megan continued her desperate search for escape. Food and water ran low, forcing her to rely on whatever sustenance the forest provided. Her clothes grew tattered, her skin scratched and bruised from navigating treacherous terrain. Yet, despite her deteriorating condition, a part of her remained oddly calm, as if accepting her fate willingly. Was this how others had felt before disappearing forever? Trapped in an endless loop, unable to break free from the forest's grip? One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Megan stumbled upon a peculiar Sita cabin hidden deep within the woods, its windows dark but its door slightly ajar. Hope surged within her as she approached cautiously, calling out in case anyone might be inside. When no answer came, she pushed the door open gently, stepping inside to find the interior eerily intact. Furniture stood arranged neatly, books rested on shelves, and personal belongings littered surfaces as if their owners had left suddenly and never returned. On the wall hung a calendar, its pages flipped to a date far in the past, marking the disappearance of someone else who had ventured too far. Among the items scattered about, Megan discovered journals belonging to previous occupants, detailing their experiences in the forest. Each entry spoke of growing confusion, disorientation, and paranoia, culminating in final messages written in frantic handwriting before going silent altogether. Reading these accounts, Megan understood fully the gravity of her situation. She was not merely lost, she was trapped in a realm beyond normal understanding, a place where logic failed and mysteries thrived. Determined to uncover answers, Megan explored the cabin thoroughly, eventually finding a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside rested an old map marked with cryptic symbols and annotations referencing locations throughout the forest. Following its directions, she ventured further than ever before, encountering sights both beautiful and terrifying: waterfalls cascading endlessly upward, meadows bathed in perpetual twilight, and creatures unlike anything she had ever seen before. Along the way, she documented everything, leaving notes and markings for those who might come after her. But with each discovery came new dangers. Shadows followed her movements, whispering promises of release if she surrendered entirely. Visions plagued her dreams, showing glimpses of others who had vanished before her faces, pale and hollow, eyes devoid of life. Still, Megan pressed on, driven by a stubborn refusal to give in to despair. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Megan found herself standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley below. The scene was breathtakingly familiar, the exact view she had admired during her initial hike. Yet, something felt fundamentally different about it now. Before her loomed a figure cloaked in shadow, its presence commanding yet serene. Without speaking a word, it extended a hand toward her, inviting her to join it. For a moment, Megan hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Then, taking a deep breath, she reached out and grasped the offered hand. Immediately, the world around her dissolved into light, consuming everything in its path. When clarity returned, Megan found herself back in the clearing where her journey had begun. Her phone lay intact beside her, untouched by the ordeal, as if none of it had ever happened. Confused and shaken, Megan reported her experience to local authorities, describing in detail everything she had endured. Investigators searched the area thoroughly, but found no evidence of anything unusual, no missing persons reports matching her descriptions, no signs of disturbances in the forest. To all outward appearances, Megan's account was nothing more than a vivid hallucination brought on by fatigue and isolation. Yet, deep down, Megan knew better. Somewhere, deep within the woods of Timber Ridge, others still waited trapped in a liminal space between worlds, hoping against hope for rescue. And though she had escaped, Megan couldn't help but wonder if she truly belonged among them. I vanished like missing 411. It was a crisp autumn morning in the small mountain town of Timber Ridge, nestled deep within the dense forests of northern Idaho. The air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter, and the sun struggled to break through the thick canopy above. At 7:15 a.m., Megan Carter prepared for another day of hiking along her favorite trail, one she had walked countless times before. The trail wound through towering pines and rocky outcrops, offering breathtaking views of the valley below. But this time, something would be different, something no one could have predicted. Megan loved the solitude of the forest, the way it wrapped around her like an old friend. She carried only the essential water bottle, some snacks, and her phone tucked safely into her pocket. As she set off down the trail, boots crunching against the frost-covered leaves, she felt invigorated by the fresh air and the promise of adventure ahead. Yet, as the hours passed and the path grew increasingly isolated, a strange unease began to settle over her. By mid-morning, Megan reached a clearing she knew well, a wide expanse of grass surrounded by ancient trees whose branches stretched skyward like skeletal fingers. It was here that she paused to take in the scenery, snapping a few photos with her phone. That's when she noticed a faint humming sound, barely audible over the rustling leaves and chirping birds. Curious, she turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint its source. The hum grew louder, more insistent, until it filled her ears completely, drowning out all other sounds. Suddenly, the world around her seemed to shift. The once familiar landscape blurred at the edges, colors fading into shades of gray as if viewed through frosted glass. Megan stumbled backward, disoriented, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "What's happening?" she whispered, clutching her phone tightly as if it might anchor her to reality. But then, without warning, the device slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the ground and shattering on impact. Panic surged through her as she realized she was completely cut off from help. The clearing now appeared eerily still, the previously lively atmosphere replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against her eardrums. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of her vision, darting between trees and vanishing just as quickly. Megan called out, her voice trembling slightly, but there was no response, only the unsettling sensation of being watched. She tried to retrace her steps, retracing the path she had taken earlier, but each turn led her deeper into unfamiliar territory. The trail markers she relied on were gone, replaced by tangled underbrush and fallen logs that blocked her way. Hours, perhaps minutes. Time seemed distorted, hair passed as Megan wandered aimlessly through the forest, her mind racing with questions. Where had she gone wrong? Why did the trail seem to twist and turn unpredictably, leading her further astray with every step? And, most importantly, why did she feel so certain that she wasn't alone? As daylight began to fade, casting long shadows across the ground, Megan spotted something unusual in the distance, a cluster of strange symbols etched into the bark of a nearby tree. They looked almost deliberate, as though carved by human hands, yet their meaning eluded her. Beneath them lay scattered remnants of what appeared to be clothing, a torn piece of fabric, a frayed shoelace, and a single photograph half buried in the dirt. Picking it up carefully, Megan examined the image closely. It depicted a group of people standing together, smiling happily, though none of their faces were familiar to her. What struck her most, however, was the date scrawled on the back years prior to her visit. A cold dread settled in her stomach as realization dawned upon her. These weren't ordinary artifacts, they belonged to others who had vanished without explanation, part of the mysterious phenomenon known locally as Missing 411. Stories abounded of hikers disappearing under similar circumstances, lured deep into the woods by unexplained forces, or simply vanishing into thin air. Some theorized alien abduction, while others pointed to supernatural entities guarding the forest jealously against intruders. Whatever the truth, Megan knew she was caught in the same snare. Night fell swiftly, plunging the forest into darkness, save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. Megan huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of branches and leaves, her body shaking uncontrollably from fear and exhaustion. Around her, strange noises echoed through the night, low growls, haunting whispers, and occasional bursts of laughter that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. Sleep proved impossible, her mind replaying every detail of the day's events in endless loops. Days, perhaps weeks, time remained elusive, hair blurred together as Megan continued her desperate search for escape. Food and water ran low, forcing her to rely on whatever sustenance the forest provided. Her clothes grew tattered, her skin scratched and bruised from navigating treacherous terrain. Yet, despite her deteriorating condition, a part of her remained oddly calm, as if accepting her fate willingly. Was this how others had felt before disappearing forever? Trapped in an endless loop, unable to break free from the forest's grip? One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Megan stumbled upon a peculiar sight: a cabin hidden deep within the woods, its windows dark but its door slightly ajar. Hope surged within her as she approached cautiously, calling out in case anyone might be inside. When no answer came, she pushed the door open gently, stepping inside to find the interior eerily intact. Furniture stood arranged neatly, books rested on shelves, and personal belongings littered surfaces as if their owners had left suddenly and never returned. On the wall hung a calendar, its pages flipped to a date far in the past, marking the disappearance of someone else who had ventured too far. Among the items scattered about, Megan discovered journals belonging to previous occupants, detailing their experiences in the forest. Each entry spoke of growing confusion, disorientation, and paranoia, culminating in final messages written in frantic handwriting before going silent altogether. Reading these accounts, Megan understood fully the gravity of her situation. She was not merely lost, she was trapped in a realm beyond normal understanding, a place where logic failed and mysteries thrived. Determined to uncover answers, Megan explored the cabin thoroughly, eventually finding a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside rested an old map marked with cryptic symbols and annotations referencing locations throughout the forest. Following its directions, she ventured further than ever before, encountering sights both beautiful and terrifying: waterfalls cascading endlessly upward, meadows bathed in perpetual twilight, and creatures unlike anything she had ever seen before. Along the way, she documented everything, leaving notes and markings for those who might come after her. But with